Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting into Future State Dark Detective, which in this case takes place in the year 2027, and there's quite a bit that I want to talk about both within this issue and also around it, with the information that DC has given us around Future State that I believe helps to better understand this issue. Because Dark Detective, it really sets the tone for like a lot of things. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping in with Dark Detective, we start off in Gotham in the year 2027, which for reference is roughly 6 or 7 years after the conclusion of death metal, but since then till now, like, quite a bit has happened. But jumping in, this issue is interestingly titled Bruce Wayne's a Dead Man, and primarily because that is the concept at the forefront at this time in 2027. But also it starts off with narration from Bruce Wayne a month after he was believed to be killed, and at this time he's just laying low observing Gotham, and at one point even comparing it to the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby, like the Lovely People song. But even in this moment, Bruce mentions that Gotham is a city that he doesn't even recognize anymore. And there are a few things that really play into him viewing Gotham this way, and one of which we don't get too much detail on at this point, but as we go deeper into the narrative, it's even possible that he may blame himself for part of this change. But at this point in time, we get a bit of a flashback to 1 month prior to this current point, which is the moment where Bruce Wayne was believed to be killed. And when we see how this happened, like, Bruce Wayne was shot in the alley, and we really don't get much of the setup to like why he was in this alley, because it's really just like a flashback, bang, he's shot and running out the alley bleeding out. And when I turned the page and seeing this, I was just like, man, what did I tell you about taking these shortcuts through these dark alleys, man? Like, I feel like I need to get a flyer and a staple gun and just go to every single alley in Gotham City and just put up a sign that says, this is a no Wayne zone. Like, if your last name is Wayne, walk around. But either way, I digress. But when this happens, we see the dude with the gun, and he turns out to be a character by the name of Peacekeeper 1, and we'll talk much more about him in a little bit. But as Bruce is running out from this alley, Peacekeeper 1 tells him that we know who you are. And with Peacekeeper saying that, it's a reference to something that had happened in the near past, which is like a huge, disastrous event that had taken place at Arkham Asylum, which is something at this point in time we don't have many details on. But whatever this event was, like, it was so bad that it had caused the Mayor Nakano, to enforce a no vigilante law. But then on top of implementing this law, the mayor had then brought in this sketchy group called the Magistrate, and with doing so, he had handed them all the resources from law enforcement, and that's how Peacemaker 1 had found out so much about Bruce Wayne, with him being like your lead merc from the Magistrate organization. But back to your current point in time with Bruce Wayne, who's supposedly dead, which then also means that he's broke again, so he then makes his way to a coffee shop, and it's here where we get a bit more information about how the Magistrate kind of finessed the death of both Batman and the death of Bruce Wayne. Because as far as press and media, first they announced the death of Batman, which they didn't take credit for, because under the mayor's agreement they're supposed to detain and capture any vigilantes, though I wouldn't be surprised if that changed soon. But while Bruce is watching the news on the screen, this young lady that mentions to him, and really just making general conversation like, man, it's crazy, like Batman's killed, and then 2 days later Bruce Wayne dies, and then she talks about the superstition of celebrities dying in threes, and at that point Bruce is kind of like, man, I don't know nothing about that. But as far as to the public, a lot of the details aren't even out, and according to the reported news, the Magistrate is still investigating a lot of this. But then when this girl kind of makes a speculation and says that Bruce Wayne, he probably OD'd somewhere after losing all his money, and immediately Bruce's mind jumps back to a month ago when he was running for his life and bleeding out. And it's really what the girl had said that had triggered Bruce Wayne's thoughts back to this particular memory. And not so much as Bruce Wayne being broke and ODing, but rather he thought of when he did have money, it opened a lot of doors for him that he wouldn't have had access to otherwise, which is exactly what he had needed after being shot, because the fortune of Bruce Wayne at a time allowed him to pay off a number of back alley doctors who could just pop up on, put his mask on, and they would just take care of his injuries, no questions asked, which would provide him with the anonymity and morphine, which was clutch for situations like this. But aside from this, I want to talk a bit more about the Magistrate situation and the whole ordeal with Peacekeeper 1, and everything they have to gain from getting Batman out the picture. Because when the mayor brought in the organization called the Magistrate, they didn't just step into the picture because they wanted Gotham to be a better city, but with stepping in, it came with a lot of power, which initially started with all the resources from law enforcement, which then allowed the Magistrate to pretty much take the place of law enforcement. But this has also given them eyes and ears all over the city, access to technology from Wayne Enterprises. Like, it literally placed Gotham City in the palm of their hand. But with Peacekeeper 1 giving the announcement that Batman has been killed, he releases the information at a press conference, and he describes it as a win for justice. But with doing so, he doesn't take the credit or even give credit to the organization, the Magistrate, which then causes the press to go crazy and asking like, was Batman murdered? Did the Joker do it? But instead he just brushes them off, letting them know that this is something that'll instead be an ongoing investigation, which really just means they're making up their story and they'll get back to everybody later. But with Bruce making his way through Gotham, one of the big things that has changed since the huge Arkham incident, which was the domino effect that gave the Magistrate control over Gotham, is the lingering effect that now the Magistrate has eyes and ears everywhere. So when Bruce looks up at his own face that says, you know, Bruce Wayne is passed, and with doing so he's like immediately solicited by this weightlifting hologram. And it's like immediately he recognizes that he has to get off the streets and keep his head down, because now all these cameras and screens, which at one point he would have access to, like back in the days of bankroll Batman, but at one point in time these things were like his ally, but now it's like technology's become his enemy, which for the record is kind of like the underlying theme of this new Dark Detective series. Because due to the current situation, he's very much forced to go off the grid. But with doing this, Bruce then makes his way into an alley. And man, once again, I'm trying to tell this dude, but really he has to stay in the shadows because he doesn't really have a choice. But I will say, like, if I was in Gotham City and my GPS said like, hey, you can skip 40 minutes from your commute, just cut through this sketchy alley, I'd probably be like, okay, and then forget all prior knowledge of safety and well-being. So I'm definitely not judging Bruce in this moment. But with Bruce holding his head down and fleeing into this alley, he comes across somebody getting mugged, which it has apparently a high probability rate in Gotham City. And in 2027, that definitely doesn't change. But when Bruce gets here, he steps in, of course, to help the guy out. And the dude with the knife, man, like, he's got to be at least like 4'11" or something. But even still, like, when the fight breaks out, this little guy does the best out of all his friends. Because for one, like, these guys, they're not gonna take down Bruce Wayne, that's obvious. But to be the shortest guy out the crew, to take a backhand to the face from Bruce Wayne, and then come back and be the only one out of the group to land a punch, it was kind of like the dude was like, hey man, don't count me out. But even still, I'll say that hit that he did land, it comes with a bit of an asterisk, because Bruce's attention was taken away when he noticed that they were spotted by one of the Magistrate drones, which I can't help but to say reminds me again of Cyberpunk. Like, every time I read an issue of Future State, it just reminds me about that game. And in a good way, because thus far I am enjoying both. And for you guys watching, let me know in the comments or over on Discord like how you feel about either one. But I'll definitely say for me, like, I've thoroughly been enjoying both, thus far at least. But in the case of Bruce, when he sees that they're spotted by this drone, he takes off while kind of clutching his stomach because his gunshot wound was only like a month ago. But with taking off, he strips out of his civilian clothes, puts on his mask, and it gives us one of our first good looks at the new Batman, Bruce Wayne Batman of this era. And at this time, like, I'm not even sure if he's keeping the Batman quote-unquote name and just going by Dark Detective and only bringing that part back. But one thing is for sure, that this version of Bruce Wayne is moving heavily into the tactical, analog, not using gadgets in a world full of gadgets type of scenario. But even with doing so, he has a bit of advantage that we'll talk about in a little bit. But as he makes his way to get away from these drones, he's shot in the calf, and I don't know how he kept moving with that. But even still, it's Bruce Wayne, like, he's walked away with a lot more damage. But during this time that Bruce Wayne is taking his evasive actions from these Magistrate drones, like, I can't help but to think, like, in this Gotham of 2027, which is lit up with these tall screens everywhere all night, like, I can only imagine that it's much tougher for Bruce now to lurk in the shadows, with there not really being much of any shadows at this point. And then on top of that, with being your quote-unquote analog Batman, I can only imagine like how hard it's gotta be to stay in stealth mode in a Gotham like this in the year 2027 with cameras and screens everywhere. But while Bruce is evading these drones, we jump over to Peacekeeper 1, who's been given all kind of law enforcement access to different cameras and all kind of security protocols, so just about anywhere that Bruce goes, Peacekeeper 1 will be able to find him. And when we see him here watching the footage from these drones, It's here where he finds out that Batman is still alive. But even with him noticing this, he's not the only one who figured something out, because Wayne Enterprises has built this city. And because of that, it's Bruce's city and his technology, even reaching back through the legacy of his parents, but it's all of these resources from the Wayne family which Magistrate is standing on the shoulders of. And because of that, Bruce can either pull it out from up under them or use it against them, but either way, Gotham City is his advantage. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and like as we go through our different talks on Future State, I'll do my best to kind of tell you guys like what happens in order of when, and as we learn more, I'll just add the information as we go through the playlist, because we really in some uncharted territory here. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.